Now let's identify the role of policy in achieving energy efficiency goals. Mark Frankel is here to do just that in his presentation, Making Energy Efficiency Real. Mark?
Thank you. Energy efficiency as an industry got its start in the oil embargoes of the U.S. by OPEC, which led to widespread gasoline shortages and swift increases in the price of various energy sources. These conditions led to a sudden broad interest in organized strategies to reduce energy use and became the basis for official policies by states and agencies around the U.S. to support reduced energy use. What we refer to as energy efficiency was originally called energy conservation, and the image of the energy crisis, as it was known at the time, evoked memories of wartime rationing. The President of the U.S. at the time, Jimmy Carter, advocated energy conservation strategies directly to the American public. He appeared in a famous television announcement evoking FDR's fireside chats, wearing a sweater and suggesting that Americans turn their heating thermostats down to 65 degrees and wear sweaters to help reduce energy use in the U.S. This message did not have broad appeal. However, President Carter also installed solar panels on the roof of the White House, later removed by Reagan. More significantly, he established the Department of Energy as a cabinet-level agency and established the National Solar Energy Laboratory, later the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. These organizations have had a major influence on the evolution of energy efficiency in the U.S. and abroad ever since that time. During the energy crisis, a number of ad hoc efforts to reduce energy use by severely limiting ventilation, shutting off alternate light fixtures, delamping fixtures, and a host of other poorly planned or executed conservation measures created health risks and safety hazards, and generally gave energy conservation a bad name. Some of these perceptions lasted decades. More recently, the term energy efficiency has become more common than the term energy conservation in the industry, suggesting wiser strategies rather than shortages. The basic notion behind organized energy efficiency programs is that utilities trying to meet load growth should seek the least costly resource to provide new capacity. Improving energy efficiency of buildings has long been recognized as a least cost resource, often costing a fraction of what it costs on a kilowatt by kilowatt basis to establish new conventional generating resources, like coal plants or gas turbines. A classic tale from the early days of the energy efficiency industry pits efficiency against nuclear power. In the Pacific Northwest U.S. in the 1970s, the Washington Public Power Supply System, fondly known as WPSS, planned to build 5 nuclear reactors to meet the projections of substantial regional load growth. Over the course of a decade, WPSS contracted with regional utilities of all sizes to provide nuclear-generated power and sold bonds to finance construction. But construction costs climbed radically, even as projected electricity load growth failed to materialize. Eventually, a major municipal utility, Seattle City Light, became convinced that it could meet its load growth in the near term with conservation programs at a fraction of the cost of the nuclear power contracts. As the other utilities began to balk, the WPSS program collapsed in what at the time was the largest municipal bond default in U.S. history. This left some utility ratepayers with debt on the order of over $50,000 per residential electric meter. When the feds stepped in to clean up the mess, the Bonneville Power Administration was tasked with a specific mandate to support regional conservation as a least-cost power resource. In the years since then, the Pacific Northwest has met a major portion of its load growth with energy efficiency strategies and continues to anticipate that energy efficiency will be the primary new generating resource in the Pacific Northwest through 2025. With policy encouragement and detailed regulations about how energy efficiency is evaluated, utilities can recover the money they invest in energy efficiency strategies directly from their ratepayers, just as they would charge ratepayers for power generating plants. The state of California has been the most aggressive in the U.S. in requiring or encouraging utilities to support energy efficiency programs, and until recently the state spent as much on energy efficiency as the rest of the U.S. combined. Nationally, investment in energy efficiency programs climbed from $1 billion annually to over $5 billion annually in the first decade of this century, and has continued to increase. This does not include recent rapid increases in renewable energy generation investments. In California, the results of a strong commitment to energy efficiency investments can be seen in a graph comparing energy use per capita in California to the rest of the U.S. Since the 1970s, California energy use per capita has remained flat or decreased slightly, as it has increased in the nation as a whole. In 2003, energy efficiency programs and efficiency requirements for buildings and appliances delivered over 15% of California's total energy load. Though utility efficiency programs are focused on least cost resource acquisition, a broader policy goal is market transformation. That is the proliferation of energy efficiency practices into broader market adoption. Energy efficiency incentive programs are considered to help take some of the risk out of new efficiency technologies and to demonstrate to the broader market that these technologies are viable. As these strategies become more widely adopted, they become opportunities for incorporation into evolving building energy codes. Until recently, this has been the broadly accepted model of market transformation. The energy efficiency of televisions is widely considered as a clear example of energy efficiency policy driving market transformation. The state of California, through its appliance performance standards in Title 20, regulates the efficiency of television sets sold in the state. Though few other states regulate television energy performance, California is such a big part of the U.S. market that manufacturers adopted these standards for almost all of their production models. This led to significant efficiency increases and reduced equipment cost across the U.S. market, even as screen size continued to increase. Despite broad deployment of energy efficiency programs around the country, the approach has grown to face several important limitations. The most important limitation is the focus of energy efficiency programs on individual building components, or widgets, as a way to improve building efficiency. Vehicle performance trends in the U.S. provide an interesting contrast to the TV example already described, and a good analogy to the building industry. Over the period of 1981 to 2007, significant changes were occurring to the average U.S. vehicle fleet characteristics. The percentage of vehicles with efficient manual transmissions dropped from 30% to 12% of the fleet. The average acceleration time for vehicles going from 0 to 60 miles per hour dropped from 15 to 9 seconds, while the weight increased from 3,000 pounds to 3,600 pounds. Despite these significant changes to weight, power, and drivetrain, overall vehicle mileage increased from a fleet average of 25 miles per gallon to a fleet average of 28 miles per gallon, about a 10% improvement. Clearly, auto manufacturers were learning to incorporate more efficient technologies into the cars. But these improvements in efficiency were used to offset other decisions about weight and engine power. If the vehicle characteristics cited for the 1981 model year had remained the same through 2006, the efficiency improvements would have led to a 50% improvement in miles per gallon to 38 miles per gallon over the same period. In the building sector, similar improvements in individual building technologies have likewise been overwhelmed by larger design decisions that negate the impact of more efficient technologies. For example, increased glazing area as a popular building feature has reduced building envelope performance more than substantial improvements in glazing and insulation technologies have improved it. Fortunately, around the turn of the century, a new way of thinking about building performance was introduced to the industry in conjunction with the sustainability movement. Programs like the USGBC LEED program encouraged a more integrated approach to building design that more readily recognized the interactive effects of different building elements. By considering the integrated design and functional aspects of energy efficiency strategies, significant new frontiers are possible for energy efficiency efforts. These strategies adopt integrated design principles to consider whole building performance metrics. This is demonstrated by the recent rapid proliferation of zero-net energy projects. NBI has been tracking the increase in Z&E projects across North America for the past 10 years. In some locations, these are referred to as zero-energy projects. We have seen a rapid increase in projects achieving Z&E and projects targeting Z&E performance, a 700% increase over this time period, as well as rapid proliferation of high-performance projects that could achieve Z&E if they incorporated rooftop solar arrays. This is sometimes referred to as Z&E ready. This represents a new and aggressive approach to energy efficiency. Z&E projects are being delivered all over North America in every climate zone. A diverse array of project types are being built to Z&E, with schools leading the way. The ability of larger buildings to achieve Z&E is bolstered by the rapid decrease in the cost of photovoltaic panels. As the price of PV drops, deployment is skyrocketing. In many parts of the world, new solar PV installations are the least expensive new generating resource available. This dropping cost of PV represents a new challenge to conventional energy efficiency strategies. Many policymakers and organizations are also recognizing that the growth of energy efficiency industries represents a significant source of new jobs, even as employment in conventional extractive energy industries face a steady decline. Employment in clean energy already substantially exceeds the number of jobs in the fossil fuel industry. This potential will drive additional policy motivation for energy efficiency deployment. Even as more and more projects are demonstrating the feasibility of achieving Z&E, a new urgency is driving efforts to vastly expand successful energy efficiency strategies. World recognition of the risk of climate change has drawn widespread efforts to reduce the energy carbon impact of the building sector. Although federal support for climate strategies has evaporated, state and local jurisdictions representing a significant majority of the U.S. population have renewed their commitment to the Paris Climate Accord. In the U.S., building energy use accounts for over 40% of national annual carbon emissions, making the building sector a critical element of climate policy efforts. Just as energy efficiency has long been recognized as the least expensive strategy to meet energy demand, energy efficiency is also widely recognized as the most cost-effective strategy to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions. In a widely cited study by the McKinsey Group in 2009, a range of energy efficiency strategies were shown to actually have a negative deployment cost when the value of greenhouse gas reduction was factored in. A major policy tool to drive energy efficiency is the adoption of more aggressive building energy codes. With the recent focus on carbon reduction, the code landscape has changed dramatically. Before the turn of the millennium, energy codes were considered the lowest common denominator of energy performance, adopting small incremental changes in slow multi-year cycles. But the urgency of climate change has led to rapid advancements in energy codes by a variety of jurisdictions around the world. Many U.S. jurisdictions have set targets for energy codes to achieve Z&E by 2030 for new construction. The rapid increase in code stringency has left many widget-based utility energy efficiency incentive programs high and dry, in that these programs no longer represent leading-edge strategies that can be paid for with ratepayer incentives. This has led to a general decline in the reach of conventional utility incentive programs. These changes in the industry and policy drivers have led us to an inflection point in the building industry with respect to what energy efficiency programs will look like in the future. There are three important trends to consider: considering whole building performance as the basis for efficiency programs, opportunities for better building operation, and more effective integration of buildings with the electric grid. Historically, energy code utility incentives and other building performance efforts have been focused primarily on building design features. But as projects have pushed toward deeper efficiency achievements, there is increasing recognition that operation strategies and occupant behavior must become part of the building efficiency strategies. Tom's discussion of building ghost loads show examples of how building operating practices and tenant behavior can impact building energy use. In the Z&E sector, it has become increasingly clear that the success or failure of a project to achieve Z&E is driven not just by design features, but to a significant degree by the behavior of tenants and building operators in managing daily building energy use patterns. ASHRAE has recently released the new Building EQ program, which is able to rate both the design and the operating characteristics of buildings. This program will serve to significantly increase industry attention on building operating characteristics and designs which support good building operation. Meanwhile, some utilities and organizations are piloting a new kind of utility efficiency program, which provides incentives based on actual building operating characteristics. This approach is used at the Bullitt Center, a net zero energy building in Seattle, Washington. Building owners are paid incentives based on the difference between actual energy use and a predicted dynamic baseline for energy use in the building under conventional operating characteristics. The difference between the dynamic baseload prediction and actual measured energy use is the basis of incentive payments. This program is called Metered Energy Efficiency Transaction Structure, or MEETS. This is being considered by many utilities as a new way to incentivize measurable energy efficiency based on actual building operating characteristics. Notably, building tenants have a monthly budget of free electricity and pay no energy bill unless they exceed their monthly budget, in which case they have to pay for all of the energy they used. This encourages tenant behavior that aligns with the project's zero energy goals. Strategies adopted in successful Z&E projects have demonstrated that providing meaningful and actionable feedback to operators and occupants can mean the difference between achieving Z&E goals and failing to do so. But these strategies can also be applied to existing buildings to engage operators and occupants in more meaningful strategies to reduce energy use. This is a focus on behavior instead of widgets and represents a new frontier for the energy efficiency industry. Hundreds of companies have sprung up in the past 5 years to provide direct and actionable feedback to building occupants and operators that allow them to make better daily decisions about reducing energy use. Another major change to the energy efficiency industry and the building industry in general will be in how buildings interact with the electric grid. To understand this, we need to talk first about how the electric grid is changing. In the 1950s, the constant availability of electric power was a major marketing point. The most important characteristic of the grid is dependability. Grid dependability is a major indicator of economic development and stability across the world. Buildings rely heavily on grid dependability, and in some climates may become uninhabitable within hours of a grid failure. Changes to the way we generate and use power have significant implications for grid dependability and resource cost, and will change the way we think about energy efficiency. To provide power, utilities deploy generating resources in a logical order. Here is an oversimplified example of a daily utility load shape. Base load capacity consists of generating resources that are always on and can be run continuously for long periods of time. Examples of base load plants include nuclear plants, which need to run constantly, and coal plants, which start slowly and run most efficiently at steady capacity. Load-following resources represent a more adjustable power source that can be dispatched in hours based on anticipated daily load patterns. These plants may be combined cycle gas turbines or other generating plants. Finally, a utility must have access to peak power plants that can be cycled very quickly in response to short-term load variability. Peak power resources are also often purchased by utilities on the spot market as needed. With the rapid drop in the cost of photovoltaic solar electric generation and the proliferation of renewable energy installations, utilities face a new challenge in managing the grid. In addition to the monumental complexity of managing distributed renewable generating resources on a large interconnected grid, utilities face major new economic challenges. In this hypothetical example, deployment of PV solar electricity generation has taken a big bite out of midday electric demand. But notice that despite the significant reduction in overall electricity use, the peak demand is still relatively high, requiring most of the same generating capacity as before. The utility must therefore maintain nearly the same generating resources, even though they get to sell less power from those generating resources, making the overall operation more expensive relative to revenues. Worse still for the utilities, the baseload power plants can't be shut down, so the utility must find a market to sell the excess generation from the solar resource. In some cases, this can lead to negative power prices, where the utility is actually paying customers to use power. This utility operating characteristic has manifested in the state of California as the famous duck curve. In this case, as more distributed generation in the form of photovoltaics is added to the grid each year, the shape of the daily grid load looks more and more like a duck. Notice again that despite the significant reduction of electricity demand in the daytime, the evening peak power needs remain relatively unchanged. Although the load shapes I just described look relatively smooth over the course of a day, the reality is much messier. This graph shows the high degree of monthly variability of wind power, a rapidly proliferating generating resource, over many years in the Pacific Northwest. In this plot of 30 years of monthly wind data, delivered wind capacity can vary by 50% or more in the same season. And even a fixed panel solar PV installation on a building will experience significant moment-to-moment fluctuations based on cloud cover. The vagaries of power generation must be dealt with by utilities in real time at every moment. This leads to a constant balancing of different generating resources that have different costs to operate. While buildings may see demand and peak power charges on their bills, utilities are facing highly variable power prices from moment to moment as they strive to keep their load balanced. Any failure in this regard leads to power outages. For individual buildings, the cost of electricity typically follows a simple pattern. Energy use peaks in the daytime, perhaps with a slight lull at midday as employees leave for lunch. Electricity rates are often tiered, with a base rate for low-use periods and a peak rate for high-use periods. There is also typically a demand charge, which is based on the magnitude of the 15-minute peak use for the building during a billing cycle. Depending on generating constraints, different utilities use different mixes of rates and factors to come up with total monthly utility bills. In many regions, demand charges can represent the majority of the total energy bill. But as utility rates respond to changing supply conditions and the cost to deploy solar power and battery storage decreases, buildings will become increasingly incentivized to deploy new kinds of energy efficiency strategies in new ways to reduce operating costs. These factors will affect the way we will think about energy efficiency in the future. Buildings will deploy design and operating strategies which strive to modify building load shapes in response to grid load constraints and pricing characteristics. These efforts will focus on different load modification strategies. Load shedding, where maximum building energy use is reduced to reduce demand charge impacts. Peak shifting, where building design and operating strategies are modified to move more building load onto non-peak pricing periods. Dynamic response, where buildings are incentivized by the utility to respond to real-time signals from the utility to temporarily reduce energy use during supply-constrained periods. And addressable energy storage, where some percentage of on-site batteries or car charging is dispatched directly by the utility to store temporary power surplus from overgeneration. The main takeaway from this discussion of grid interaction is that energy efficiency will no longer be defined only as reducing the flow of electricity from the grid to the building, but will also include two-way power flow, time-of-use pricing incentives, and more direct interaction with energy generation and storage resources, all of which will be measured and accounted in real time. And as buildings continue to progress toward deep efficiency and Z&E strategies, successful efficiency programs will expand from a focus on building technologies to include the role of tenants and building operation and on measured whole building performance outcomes. There is much work to do. Thank you.
And thanks, Mark. It is time to do our final roundtable. So let's go to our panel to further discuss opportunities for delivered energy efficiency and the role of policy. All right, gentlemen, during the last presentation, Mark emphasized the role of the design community in addressing climate change. So Chris, let's go to you. How is building energy efficiency connected to climate change?
Well, it's interesting. If we understand that buildings are our single largest energy demand sector and use sector, we could easily say that buildings are our number one polluter. We don't often think of it that way because the exhaust pipes are down at the power plant. The good news is that we as knowledgeable building professionals, this is something we can actually do something about. When we make better buildings, it sounds a little corny, but when we make better buildings, we clean the air. And if we really want to aggressively address carbon emissions and reduction in the pollution associated with the building sector, we've got to deliver better buildings.
A lot of people who are trying to do the right thing, recycle or use less energy, whatever, maybe feel like they're not making a difference or what they're doing is not really having an impact. But the design community, it totally matters what we do because what we do will affect climate change. So I think it's really exciting to be a design professional in this time.
And I would just like to add, going back to something that Chris had shared in one of his earlier presentations, he was showing us how the energy code, our codes, are now currently at half of where they were 25 years previously and heading down even further than that. So, the design community has done a lot already, led by ASHRAE, and I think we still have a lot to do, but let's just keep pushing that bar lower.
Very good. All right, our next question is, what is the role of policy in shaping better building performance? Mark, shall we go to you for that?
Well, I talked about the different ways that policy is trying to approach building performance. I think the most important one is code because it affects every new building and we keep building them, so it's going to keep affecting more and more buildings. But I think a lot of jurisdictions that are trying to achieve their climate goals, their goals under the Paris Accord, are looking to engage the existing building sector as well. So they're looking at some of the trigger points we talked about. They're putting disclosure ordinances in place to make people look at their building performance. The ASHRAE BEQ program follows along with that nicely. I think we're going to see more and more engagement by policymakers in the building sector.
Yeah. The market transformation that's happening and that has to happen with regard to the building sector requires both the push forces and the pull forces. We can educate and teach all day long, but policy plays an important role of pushing and saying we've got to do a little bit better. As Mark just said, when we are improving an existing building or some building that may be 40 or 50 years old and doesn't have insulation or good windows or good HVAC systems and otherwise, sometimes if we're updating the building, if a local policy is requiring bringing that up to code, that's a really effective market transformation mechanism. Codes, unfortunately, are not uniformly applied or even present across the United States, and our peers around the world, look to us for policy guidance as well. And so a lot of countries that are just starting to think about building codes for the first time or thinking about how to update their energy codes, in particular in the context of an uncertain energy future, policy plays a key role. ASHRAE understands this. One of the things that we've got going on at ASHRAE is the GGAC initiative, the Grassroots Government Advocacy Initiative. And the goal there is to engage local ASHRAE members in helping to shape local code decisions. All too often, a local code decision is maybe made by somebody who doesn't understand the latest efficiency technologies or the role of PV or the role of insulation or the latest HVAC technologies. So we need those knowledgeable ASHRAE members and design professionals and others who are really leaders in the industry to become actively engaged in helping to shape those local decisions.
I just would like to add that where you see membership and design community engaged in this, you really see aggressive advanced policies.
Absolutely.
Places like Seattle, Vancouver, the BC STEP code is a really exciting new code that's going to make a big difference. New York, the Northeast, there's all kinds of states, and of course California has been doing this for a long time. So there's leadership.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
sir?
I'd just like to add a couple of thoughts on that, is that, as these energy requirements for our buildings keep going down and down and down, we're engineers. We are accepting the challenge to come up with the ideas and the technologies and whatever to make that happen. So,
a lot of people balk at policy, thinking, oh, that's just government trying to push me. What we find is that the more we hurt, the more we look to policy decisions to help us navigate those difficult times. Energy is actually pretty cheap right now, but what happens when we have energy inflation? We need the policies to help us navigate those waters.
Makes perfect sense. All right, one more question. How should designers account for greenhouse gas emissions in building performance upgrades? Tom, you want to take this for us?
I'm going to answer your question with a question.
Oh, I love when you do that.
Okay. I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was something at the Chicago Climate Exchange that put a dollar value on greenhouse gas reductions. What happened to that? And you might not know, but I bet Mark does.
You guys know?
Well, there's a lot of countries, of course, that have a value on carbon, and there's active carbon markets around the world. There's some in the U.S. The state of California and other states on the West Coast are signing on to that. In the Northeast, they have a carbon market. We had an election where we tried to get a carbon tax and a cap and trade system in place in Washington. They were both on the ballot. They didn't make it. But it'll come back. I think we'll see that more. And I think we need to recognize also that when we talk about source energy, we are starting to integrate some of the upstream impacts of greenhouse gas emissions into our energy sources. So as Chris said, we think about the pollution from buildings as being way far away at the other end of the grid, but that's directly related to buildings, and I think more and more designers are starting to account for that.
Absolutely.
All right. You got your question answered. Sort of.
I was counting on him. I
right.
wasn't worried about it.
Good. Well, speaking of questions, that is the end of our round table, and now, once again, it's time to hear from you. If you have a question for our expert panel, please use the interface on your screen to submit, and we have a stack, so we are ready to go. Our first question is addressed directly to Mark. What is the role of energy modeling in energy efficiency?
We talked about this a little bit before, and I think when we look at the trajectory of getting our codes down to super efficient buildings, we really have to move into performance, where we're actually modeling building performance and understanding integrated system performance. And I think there's a big challenge for the modeling community because there's so few modelers that actually follow up with whether their model was accurate after they build it. They make all modeling and makes a whole bunch of assumptions about how the building's going to be used to prove that the building that you're designing is better than it could have been, and that's the end of it. And we really need follow-up to see, did I use the right inputs in the model? Is the building actually being used that way? Can I make better decisions at the front that make the model more predictive? And that follow-up, I think, is on the industry to institute into the design process. And that will improve both the assumptions and the accuracy. So we talked earlier about whether modeling was accurate. We need to get to higher and higher accuracy by having a follow-up system for modeling. And it needs to be part of building operation. We need to calibrate those models over time so that it becomes an active part of building operation. So it becomes part of the whole life cycle of the building.
ASHRAE plays a key role here. First of all, we are fortunate. The energy models we have today and the energy modeling tools we have today are dramatically better than they were back when I was in grad school. And ASHRAE 90.1 now has multiple paths of compliance which rely on those energy models. But Mark brings up a really important missing piece, and that's that feedback loop where we can do all of this very creative modeling and figure out, what we do in ASHRAE 90.1 is we're looking under, for every little kilowatt and every little BTU we can find that's cost effective. We need the feedback loop on performance, of actual performance, to understand, okay, is the occupancy schedules in the model the way it should be, the lighting schedules, how about the weather tapes that we're using? We need that feedback loop so that we can constantly refine those models.
Okay, let's move on to our next question. How can HVAC professionals do a better job integrating batteries, solar PV, and other distributed energy resources that are being deployed through tariffs and programs in support of state greenhouse goals? Is that one for you, Tom?
Well, I'll take a crack at it,
Okay.
but I'd like to hear what Mark has to say on it also. I think Mark already mentioned about how the cost of solar has been coming down and down and down and down to the point of where that's becoming a more mature technology. And just like our color TVs at home, they're probably, a tenth the cost of what they were 15 years ago for the same size unit. So, these are emerging technologies, and I think probably, a little crystal ball on this question here. Are building systems going to look the same in 10 or 15 years as they do now? And my guess is no.
I would just add that as Tom said, the price of solar has come down. The price of batteries is parallel and coming down, and soon they're going to cross the threshold where in various locations around the country it makes sense to deploy batteries to avoid demand charges or deploy ice cooling, ice storage strategies. All kinds of new technologies are going to come into this equation very soon.
We often talk about buildings, but one of the key transition industries that's going to be affected by all of this is our utilities. As Mark pointed out in his presentation, they're very sensitive to the time in which we're asking for energy. And these technologies are going to really change the way the utilities interact with buildings.
All right, very good. And let's move on. This comes from John in Waterloo, Ontario. John writes, I agree that envelope is the first and most important element in energy efficiency. How do we get away from all glass buildings? How do we make insulation sexy? And I believe there's a second question that goes together, and I'll read this one as well. It's Eric in Madison, Wisconsin. ASHRAE 90.1 clearly indicates an energy efficient building needs to have a window to wall ratio that does not exceed 40%. Will the architectural community accept this or continue to believe more glass is better? So they kind of go together with that one, gentlemen. What's the answer?
Well, this is pretty close to home here.
Okay.
First of all, we have a love affair with glass. We love glass, and fortunately, the glass and glazing industry has not been silent or stagnant with regard to its innovation. The glazing systems that we have today are dramatically better than the glazing systems we had just 20 years ago. We can cut cooling loads in half. I don't foresee our love affair with glass changing anytime soon. I do see that as we seek deep energy efficiency in this holistic thinking, we might use glass differently. We might be a little more sensitive to building orientation or overglazing. The one question was actually inaccurate. ASHRAE doesn't say 40%. That's in the prescriptive compliance path of 90.1. 40% is the limit. And if you want more than 40% glazing, like these all-glass buildings here in downtown Atlanta, you've got to go to another compliance path within ASHRAE, and you've got to do a building model. We're finding that some of the, really leading, zero energy buildings are realizing that I don't necessarily need an all-glass building. Maybe I don't need 40%. Some of the daylighting studies suggest that, we can get really great daylighting in schools and in office buildings at about 30% glazing. You've got to have the right glazing, and again, you want to have the energy efficient glazing. Fortunately, like I said, the window industry has been a great innovator over the past couple of decades, and we've got really low U-factor products, really great high visible transmittance products, and glazing systems that look optically clear and block 75% of the solar gain. What does that do to your cooling load? What does that do to the size of your HVAC system and your installed capacity? Yeah. So there's a lot of innovation that we can count on there.
I want to say that it's not just the architects that like glazing. The developers love it too. In some cities, they're convinced that if they don't have as much glazing as the building across the street, they're not going to sell their condos. So let's not put it all on the architects.
We'll try not to beat up on the architects just for a few minutes. All right, our next question. Did the elementary school deep energy efficiency project first reduce loads to reduce the installed system capacity? And Tom, this one would be for you.
That wasn't part of it was an HVAC renovation project, but one of the first times I went out and visited the school was during the wintertime, and I could see that there was frost on half of the building. Insulation gaps. So even without thermographic inspection, which means that probably designers should inspect their building projects on a frosty day, on a frosty morning. That would be one of the takeaways from that. But we did repair the gaps in the envelope as we rightly should have. We did not replace the windows, and we did upgrade the lights. So, and all of that was part of the solution.
Very good. All right, next question. Do you consider site EUI over source EUI when analyzing building efficiency? Mark?
We talked about this a little bit before, but source EUI brings in the upstream impacts of energy generation sources or fuel sources. But even that is inaccurate. Natural gas has upstream impacts from leakage that are not part of the site energy equation or are not fully part of it. So that's a pathway to a more holistic thinking about greenhouse gas impacts. On the other hand, the piece of data that comes to the building owner, who you're expecting them to manage energy over time, is site energy. So I think we have to think of energy use at multiple levels. In the design, we should think about site energy or source energy implications, absolutely. But we have to remember that the feedback to the building itself is going to be a site energy data point, and so we have to be ready to talk about that as well.
And I would refer that the question back to that chart that I had about the two schools in Loudoun County, Virginia. Huge difference, and site energy was lower, source energy was higher, and operating cost was even higher still.
Sorry, one more point on that. ASHRAE uses the cost as the basis for this, and that is considered a compromise between site and source energy. So,
yeah, I want to add to this too. As Mark said, the owner gets an energy bill from his utility, and it's based on site energy. I foresee a day when that energy bill will also include the carbon implications of that, the source energy associated with that. I foresee a day, because we understand that not every utility uses the same mix of fuels. Some places have nice clean hydro. Some places are going to use an awful lot of PV. Others are going to be constrained with natural gas or petroleum or coal. We're going to have to start giving signals if we want people to start valuing those different metrics. And we now have the analytical tools, and even in the energy modeling world now, we can look at local fuel mix to actually understand the carbon implications of a given set of decisions.
And I would just add that Energy Star, when you do an Energy Star benchmarking, that has site, it has source, it has cost, and it has greenhouse gases on it.
Excellent.
All right, let's see. Many older buildings located in cities such as New York have single pipe steam feed, condensate return systems feeding radiators. Systems as designed are inefficient. Tenants wind up with overheated spaces and wind up opening windows to reduce the room temperatures. This is an obvious energy loss that does not get much attention. How should we address this issue?
Okay. You know, one of the things that you can tell a steam-heated building by how many windows are open.
Exactly.
So this is a very not uncommon. Okay, and whether it's a one-pipe steam system or a two-pipe steam system, again, not uncommon. I would say, that this is very much in need of an energy upgrade. There would be significant cost savings associated with natural gas reduction, although they'd probably have to repipe the whole building. So, it would be the building upgrade is something that would need to be done. But again, if you want to see how bad it is, do that therms per heating degree day analysis.
Okay, let's move on. This is Mohammed in Dubai. Are there specific energy efficient design considerations that need to be considered for cooling designs in hot and humid climate cities?
Oh, great.
Be hot and humid.
Yeah, great question. Yeah. First of all, it's important for us to acknowledge that we haven't addressed really hot and really humid climates, in our standards in ASHRAE 90.1 until recently. And just in the past two cycles of 90.1, we actually are including what is now known as climate zone 0, extremely hot and dry climates, and extremely hot and humid climates. And the envelope decisions and the HVAC decisions that work most cost effectively in those climates, we don't have those climates in the United States. So we're talking about basically equatorial climates around the world. The good news is that there's a lot of proven evaporative cooling technologies, solar shading technologies, the glazing technologies I talked about earlier, which reduce solar gain. And in some climates, evaporative cooling is going to work really well. In other climates, you're going to have other cooling strategies. One of the most effective cooling strategies is keeping the sun out. That kind of flies in the face of that all-glass love affair that we have. But you're going to see a lot of innovation in those climate zones where people are really trying to minimize cooling load.
I just want to point out, from an engineering perspective, if you look at the efficiency of refrigerant-based cooling systems, the hotter it gets, the less efficient they are per amount of energy put in. While evaporative systems, the hotter it gets, the more cooling energy you get out of each unit of energy put in.
Important point. All right, let's see what we have. With more complexity of controls for energy savings and lack of expertise of maintenance, how do you deal with this, especially when maintenance abandons these controls and manually runs the system when things don't work, again, due to lack of maintenance? I can tell over here. We're going to go to Tom to start this one off.
Okay. As we've said many, many times in today's webinar, communications are important. Right. All right, and wherever this is, somebody is paying that utility bill, and somebody should be keeping track of that utility bill, and somebody should be asking questions when the utility bills go way, way up. Now, I know that we do a lot of K-12 school projects, and one of the things about the K-12 community in Indiana is that all of the different people in there, the teachers, the school boards, the superintendents, they all have their own peer groups where they get together and they discuss and they talk about strategies and everything else. In Indiana, anyway, there is no peer group for this constituency that the question is about here. So I took it upon myself to try and educate a whole lot of these guys, and the results were, frankly, really, really good. So, it can be done. I think most people, I have faith in most people. They want to do a good job. They need to know what a good job looks like and go from there.
We have to value the people that are running and operating buildings more. We've said several times in this webinar today that we need to have everybody around the table. Well, a key constituency that has to be around the table are the people that we're empowering and charging to operate the building. They're critical players in achieving those deep energy goals that we're trying to achieve.
Okay, very good. And this one is from Brazil. I'd like to know what the architect's role would be within this more holistic vision for achieving energy efficiency. Oh, they're looking at each other. Who's going to take it?
I'll start.
The architect.
I will say, the experience we've had now with sustainable building projects, the LEED program, et cetera, is that this is really a team effort, and the architect plays a critical role in that. And they have to set expectations for performance. It's not just the engineer that's going to deliver building performance. It's absolutely the architect. There's a whole bunch of design strategies that have everything to do with building layout and physical layout of the building and physical features and passive features. It's a critical place for the architects to be, but they also have to understand the implications of their decisions on opportunities for system efficiency and how the systems are going to work based on their designs. So it's really about an integrated approach to the whole thing. In the old days, we used to say you design the building, you'd throw the design over the wall to the engineers, and they'd put some system in it, and then that'd get tossed over the wall to the electrical engineers, and so on and so forth. It can't be like that again. It can't be like that anymore. It has to be a team discussion, and that's where the good ideas and the best buildings come from. And all the best high-performing buildings are deep integration of architectural and engineering design solutions.
All too often, we set up this kind of bipolar argument that doesn't need to occur. That the architects want this, but the engineers want this. Well, really, if we get those people around the table, they both want the same thing. They want a successful building project. They want a building in which the people are safe and comfortable and that uses the smallest amount of energy possible and lasts a long time and that people love being in. We spend all this time indoors. So what Mark said, we've got to make sure that it's not a competitive environment. It is an integrated mutualism environment which needs the architects and the engineers at the table working together to come up with creative solutions.
All right, our next question comes from Egypt. Over time, the efficiency of systems or equipment tend to be reduced. Is periodic maintenance enough to keep system performance stable, or are there solutions to keep systems achieving high performance without affecting payback? Tom, let's go to you for this one.
That's an interesting question, and there are some things like lighting. Lighting is going to deteriorate over time, so your efficiency is going to be lost there. Regular maintenance should keep stuff operating at the approximate right level. Okay, and whether it's chillers or something, keep the tubes clean. Keep your, so keep your coils clean. Keep your air filters clean, and all of this other stuff. So, I'm not enough of an expert to be able to answer that question directly, but I don't think that it should have much of an impact over time.
Okay.
I guess I would say to keep in mind, number one, that things wear out. They eventually wear out, and you can extend their life and keep them operating as best as possible over time, but eventually they wear out, and you need to not go way beyond that lifespan. It's time to replace the equipment. That's the right thing to do. And the other thing is that replacing in kind is not necessarily the best solution either, because there's so many good new technologies and changes to everything that make it so much better that you need to be on the lookout for upgrades in the replacement cycle.
Classic example is just look at the innovation that has occurred in small package units of heat pumps and air conditioners just in the past few decades. We used to think that, you know, a certain energy efficiency rating was good, and now, you know, that's what we're replacing with you know, SEER 18 and 20 and 22 units. So there's just a lot of times that that piece of equipment or that piece of technology has played out its useful life, or we've added a new twist to an old heat exchanger, for example. I think about ground source heat pumps. You know, we didn't really think about those 20 years ago, but now heat pump technology has evolved so much that it might be time to invest and change a piece of equipment. Maintenance, obviously, everybody at home should replace their air filters, you know.
Right. I'll go home and do that right away. Let's see. So from Canada, we have this question. Can we use sophisticated analytical and automation software to bring down the cost of energy efficient building design, rather? Do I need to read that one again? I may not have read that one clearly for you.
Let's look at it.
Can we use sophisticated analytical and automation software to bring down the cost of energy efficient building design?
You know, I have learned not to ever underestimate the people that are doing advanced software design and automation design and control strategies, because every cycle of ASHRAE 90.1 we see some new control technologies coming into play, or we see the next iteration of a piece of energy modeling software and goes, wow, I didn't realize it could do that. So I think there's absolutely this is going to be a critical player in that holistic team that's going to be delivering more energy efficient buildings.
I think the technology is pretty far ahead of the deployment. However, there's a lot of really cool technologies out there that are just barely starting to poke into the market, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. On the other hand, I would also caution that if it's a system that helps make it easier to run our buildings and more clear what we should be doing, that's great. If it's a whole bunch more data that we're dumping on somebody that they don't know what to do with, that's not helpful.
Okay. All right, this is a long one, so bear with me. If costs and short-term profits are the primary drivers of energy efficiency and energy conservation, should ASHRAE advocate or lobby more for tax reform to incentivize the length of time owners hold on to buildings? In Europe, the lending requirements for buildings are different, and thus owners of buildings hold on to buildings much longer, making the energy efficiency argument easier. This looks like it might fall into your court, Mark, to start off at least.
Well, there's a lot of different things we can try to make to change the economics equation for building performance. We keep talking about the need to really invest in our existing building stock to make them better, and that's easy if we have a couple extra $1 trillion. We need to change the market conditions so that people who own buildings make different decisions based on market characteristics. Is it a tax structure? Is it a fee? Is it incentives? Or is it some combination of all those things? There's all kinds of different financial structures that are being experimented with to try and drive building performance improvement. But what we have now is not delivering enough, so yes, I agree. And ASHRAE has a role in this. I mean, ASHRAE is committed to the 2030 Challenge and the Paris Accords, and that means ASHRAE members should be out there advocating for this stuff. Absolutely. We got to try new things.
All right, we don't have a lot of time left. Let's see what we can get through. Do the principles discussed today apply to making energy efficiency a reality in the industrial sector?
I'll take a really quick pass at that.
Okay.
In industry, their energy bills are huge, but it's so much a part of their bottom line that efficiency is a key value for them. They spend so much money and energy. If they can improve efficiency of a piece of equipment, it can save them huge amounts of money. So they actually, if you look at the efficiency of industry, they've come down way more rapidly than overall building energy efficiency has improved.
Pumps and motors, way more efficient because of the industrial need.
All right, we only have a very short time, so let's see if we can get through this one. What do you think of going with an EUI target like the British Columbia Step Code in Canada versus doing an ASHRAE 90.1 model approach? That may not be an easy, quick answer, but...
Myself, I've been advocating for what I call an outcome-based code for a long time. The idea that eventually we need to get to the point where we are setting targets for our building performance. We've already set goals of net zero energy use. To me, that means we've set a goal to measure actual energy use and have it net out at zero. So I think we're on our way to what I call an outcome-based code. And the BC step code is a good step on that way.
Yeah. Okay. Imagine what would happen if building owners were actually rewarded for achieving those efficiency objectives. Different lending structures, different utility rates would change the market.
You're right, something to think about. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for all your wonderful answers, but unfortunately, we are out of time for questions. I want to thank our viewing audience for their participation today. And before we go, we're going to turn things over to our panelists for a summary of today's program. Gentlemen?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in. And for those architects out there, I'm going to ask that you trust us to bring the same level of creativity to the systems that you are bringing to the building. And to the building owners out there, I'm going to ask that you perhaps ask the right questions. Ask the questions of the engineer who you're going to be hiring here. If you were going into surgery, you wouldn't want the low-cost surgeon. If you were going into court, you wouldn't want the low-cost lawyer. If you're going into a design project, don't go for the low-cost engineer. Do the testing, ask the questions to make sure you're hiring somebody who has the vision and the experience to make energy efficiency a reality in your building. And finally, to the HVAC design community, I would say let's make sure that we stay current on codes and technologies. Let's be curious. And let's have fun designing the next generation of buildings that make energy efficiency a reality.
Okay, Mark?
Thanks. I want, first of all, to have everyone recognize that in the future, when we talk about energy efficiency, we're going to be talking about buildings that are defined by effective integrated systems that involve the design, the operation, the occupants, everything, even the interaction with the utility grid, so much more deep integration. Second, I would say that environmental priorities that we've set for ourselves make buildings a big priority. So buildings are part of the solution, and designers should be out there actively trying to help do their part to bring down the energy use of the building sector. And finally, leading practitioners are already leading the way, showing that we can deliver high-performance net zero buildings. We know it can be done, so the design community should take up the challenge.
Go ahead, Chris.
We have to prioritize buildings more. All buildings, existing, new, and we have to prioritize delivered building performance more. To do this, we've got to engage everyone. Architects, engineers, the maintenance staff, the general contractors, the lenders, the insurers, the building officials charged with seeing if we're meeting the code. We've got to engage everyone, the commissioning agents for envelope, for lighting, for HVAC. All of these people are working together for a common goal, a shared goal, a building that actually performs. Fortunately, ASHRAE is strategically positioned to address this challenge. We've got over 57,000 members around the world who understand this stuff and understand the importance of our buildings. We've got the skills, the knowledge, the ability, and the tools to make a difference and to achieve these objectives. Working together with all of the many committed building professionals around the world, we can actually deliver on ASHRAE's mission, which is to serve humanity and promote a sustainable world.
All right, thank you to all of you today. Wonderful program. But that is all the time we have today. This webcast will be available on demand by visiting the ASHRAE Webcast page at ashrae.org/webcast by May 4th, 2018. Also on the ASHRAE Webcast page, you can complete the participant reaction form and print your certificate of attendance. Finally, on behalf of ASHRAE, I want to thank all of our presenters and viewing audience for their participation in making today's program such a success. Thank you for watching ASHRAE's webcast, Making Energy Efficiency a Reality. For ASHRAE and our membership worldwide, I'm Jennifer Gladstone.